Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking something absolutely fascinating. We're looking at Surah 17, which is traditionally known as the night journey. Now, this text is usually wrapped up in all these heavy layers of mystical and historical interpretations, right? But what happens if we strip all of that away? What if we just look exclusively at the internal structural language of the source text itself? Well, a totally different picture emerges. It turns out we're not just looking at a story from the past. We're actually looking at a highly practical, universal blueprint for human consciousness, societal survival, and personal accountability. It's literally a manual for the present. Let's get into it.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the journey of consciousness, then look at these cycles of rise and fall, move into total individual accountability, lay out the ethical blueprint, and finally wrap up with the ultimate guidebook.
Okay, let's dive into this by confronting the very first verse head-on. What is the true nature of this so-called night journey? You know, if you approach this through the usual lens of external traditions, you're probably expecting a literal, physical narrative. But if we let the source material define its own terms, we are immediately challenged to completely rethink our baseline assumptions. See, when we compare the traditional view, a physical, mystical flight up through the heavens, against a purely textual view, the source material actually points us toward a journey of internal consciousness and perception. And by subverting our expectations right out of the gate, the text reveals this highly functional theme. It's actively moving us away from just marveling at some magical event in the sky, and instead, it's forcing us to look inward at the architecture of our own minds and how we actually perceive reality.
Section 1. A Journey of Consciousness. Let's see how this builds by looking purely at the Arabic vocabulary of that famous opening verse. So, the text describes a movement from Al-Masjid al-Haram to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Now let's break that down. The root of masjid relates to prostration or submission. Haram means inviolable or protected. So this first term, it represents a foundational, safe state of aligning with divine law. Then, the journey takes the subject to the Aqsa state, meaning the furthest, most expansive, ultimate state of submission and awareness. The source is indicating that this isn't necessarily a geographical commute at all. It's a profound elevation of the mind and of your very state of being.
And the text explicitly tells us the purpose of this psychological and spiritual elevation. It says, so that we might show him from our signs. This elevated state of consciousness isn't the end goal, it's the prerequisite. It's the experiential preparation you actually need to witness and comprehend the divine patterns, the signs that govern human existence. Section 2. Cycles of Rise and Fall. Let's zoom out to the macro level to see what these signs actually look like in human societies. Immediately after mentioning these signs, the text shifts into a historical template, specifically using the children of Israel as a working model. The source outlines a very natural, cyclical law of societal collapse. Here's how it goes. Step 1, affluence and comfort emerge. Step 2, the privileged class, the text literally calls them the affluent ones, are given authority but defiantly disobey and go beyond bounds. Step 3, the natural consequences become inevitable. And step 4, complete destruction follows. Notice how this isn't framed as random divine anger at all. It's a predictable, self-inflicted cycle of corruption. The absolute crucial point here is perfectly summarized in this brief, incredibly powerful quote from the text. And if you return, we return. The source presents this as an ongoing, predictable law of reciprocity for literally any community in history. If a society returns to arrogant corruption, well, the natural law returns with destructive consequences. It's a highly functional, universal warning. Section 3. Total individual accountability. Now that we've seen how entire empires fall, the text drastically zooms in from the fate of nations to something much smaller, but honestly, infinitely heavier, your own neck. The source uses a surprisingly striking metaphor here. It uses the Arabic root tyr, which literally means bird, or that which flies. But it's used here to describe your destiny, or your outcomes, organically fastened securely to your neck. What this brilliantly illustrates is that accountability isn't some external ledger sitting in a cosmic filing cabinet somewhere. No, it is an organic consequence woven directly into your very being. You carry the weight of your own choices.
And the text takes this even further, completely eliminating any idea of corporate blame, tribal salvation, or external saviors. It states, "Read your record. Sufficient is yourself today as a reckoner against yourself." You write the record, and ultimately you are the sole witness and auditor of your own actions. The accountability is entirely self-evident and inescapable. Section 4, the ethical blueprint. Because bearing that heavy burden of absolute personal accountability, how are we actually supposed to navigate daily life? Well, the text anticipates this and gives us a practical blueprint. The source outlines what some call the 10 principles, a core behavioral blueprint for conscious living. And this brilliantly illustrates that true submission isn't about sectarian rituals at all, it's about universal human ethics. It commands an undivided orientation, what's known as tawhid. It demands exceptional psychological gentleness toward parents, maintaining socioeconomic balance, preserving human life, protecting sexual integrity, and strictly honoring contracts. It's just a beautifully grounded, real-world manifesto. But perhaps the most profound of all these practical directives is the command for epistemological integrity. The text warns, "Do not pursue that of which you have no knowledge," noting that your hearing, your sight, and your heart will all be questioned. This single verse totally dismantles our reliance on hearsay, unverified assumptions, and blind following. It demands real intellectual rigor. You are fully accountable for how you process information, which brings us to Section 5, the ultimate guidebook, and how to actually navigate the text itself. Now, what's really interesting here is that the absolute key to understanding how this guidebook works comes down to one specific, bold Arabic word used in the source material: sarafna. Sarafna comes from the concept of tasreef. It basically means to turn, rotate, vary, and repeat. The text explicitly states that it has rotated and diversified its concepts from every necessary angle within its own pages. Because the text is self-explanatory and complete with every example, true understanding emerges through pattern recognition. You don't need external priestly intervention to decode it for you. It literally explains itself. However, the source also neutrally observes a fascinating psychological phenomenon. It describes a hidden veil, a barrier that emerges between the text and a reader who is bound by external dogmas and doesn't actually believe in the ultimate reality. The text describes this as an almost physical condition of a closed mind. When the text is presented entirely on its own, without all those external mythologies attached, those with a veiled mind actually turn away in aversion. And this veil often manifests as a demand for physical magic. The text recounts people demanding spectacular visual miracles. Springs gushing from the earth, houses made of solid gold, climbing up into the sky. But the text contrasts this purely human desire for a magic show with the reality of the messenger, who simply replies, "Am I anything except a human messenger?" The text asserts that the true, lasting miracle is the coherent, transformative guidance itself, not some temporary suspension of the laws of physics. Which brings us right back full circle. We started with an expansive journey of consciousness and discovered a profound blueprint detailing the rise and fall of societies, a strict code of human ethics, and a self-auditing universe. So, the final question this source material leaves us with is deeply personal. When your ultimate journey ends and that bird fastened to your neck finally takes flight, what will your wide-open record reveal? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive into the source text leaves you with plenty to reflect on.